All right, hello everybody. Let's get back right into chapter 20. So some of the things that are going to be very, very key, you want to make sure that you understand, have read, and are very familiar with. First of all, the significance of Jack London's book, Iron Heel, what that novel was about and why it was significant. There were also a variety of reasons for reform that included the disparity between income. So extreme wealth and then like totally abject poverty. So there was a lot of controversies that were there over things like imperialism, urban squalor, the near war between the capital and labor. So there was a lot of tensions between, the two of them. The loosening of social morals, and we saw that to start happening. The hemline start going up, and different things like that. Unsanitary food production and the onrush of foreign immigration, as well as some environmental destruction, and finally the outbreak of political radicalism. So all of those things are kind of going into the pot that's going to culminate in this kind of reformation, wanting to, reform a lot of different things. So, excuse me. In 1911, there was the shirtwaist fire at, that Triangle Shirtwaist Company that killed 146 women and injured countless others. Folks were literally women were jumping to their death and everything. It was really very, very bad. And so look at the impact that it had on the need for reform. You also had journalism and certain exposés that were coming out, kind of exposing how different business practices, poverty, corruption, all of those things that were happening at the time. And as they were being called out, President Theodore Roosevelt dubbed them the muckrakers. Okay, so in 1890 there was a book, How the Other Half Lives, by Jacob Riis, R-I-I-S, Riis, highlighted some of the living conditions in some of these tenement buildings, specifically in New York City, but it was applied to other cities, major cities as well, Chicago, Detroit, etc. So in 1906, Upton Sinclair published a book called The Jungle, and this novel kind of dramatized the experiences of like a Lithuanian family, and his goal was to expose the exploitation of labor in the meatpacking company. But actually what it did was, the focus never really got on that. But it did highlight the unsanitary practices that were going on in meatpacking in that industry. So it actually led to the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 and the Meat Inspection Act also of 1906. A lot of books were being written. A lot of folks had a lot of commentary at this time. So that was part of the Reformation, the reform activities. So we had Edward Bellamy wrote a book called Looking Backward in 1888. And he's outlining kind of a utopian society where if we were to act now, we could do some things to ensure this more utopian, egalitarian, reformed community. And folks actually started having Bellamy groups all over the country, trying to literally thought that they could work towards these ideals. The social gospel movement also began, and it called for Christians to address things like the social, political, and economic, issues that were going on in society. In 1896, you had a congregational minister by the name of Charles Sheldon, and he, out of Topeka, Kansas, and he published a book, What Would Jesus Do?, which said WWJD that you see so popularly, on bumper stickers and bracelets and things like that, remind you, like, what would Jesus do? So that was also a part of the movement. You also had the women's movement, much of which was upper middle class women, period, of both black and white, but it was almost primarily upper middle class women. They were involved in such things as women's rights, suffrage, kind of in the general sense, black women always having a different layer of things that we're looking at, they also, and again, we're talking upper middle class women like Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. They all also worked in things, but they were more dedicated to uplifting the community. Definitely some, racial equality, definitely some suffrage and things like that. So they did take on some of the same issues or concerns, have some of the same concerns that the general or say, white women's movements were also focused on as well. But they also really did have a separate focus. So they were doing a lot with anti-lynching, things like that. So you saw a lot of black sororities also become founded. We talked about several of those: Alpha Kappa Alpha, Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, and Sigma Gamma Rho, the first four, and how they all played a major role in the Reformation movement as well. The temperance movement was also in full swing, and they believed that an alcohol-free society would kind of stop or prevent things like poverty, disease, domestic abuse, child abuse, things like that. It would also lower the rates for divorce, right? So Carrie Nation, a woman, she took a hatchet to a bar in kind of an upscale area in a hotel and caused over $3,000 worth of damage. All right. So the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or WCTU, which Carrie Nation actually helped found, kind of ostracized her, distanced themselves from her, and they considered her to be both unwomanly and unchristianly to go and take up the hatchet and start tearing down the bars. Now, there are people who did believe that what she did was right, and they kind of dubbed it Hatchet Nation, sort of a play on words there. So make sure that you guys are familiar, again, with the Hegelian dialectic. That's one of the things that's not in your textbook, but we talked about it as well, where a problem is created. They sit back and watch for the reaction, and then they bring forth the solution. And in all of those cases, the solution was already the goal from the beginning. They just kind of needed to get the buy-in of the people, which is not, people are, we would say, kind of the sheeple, if you will. But people were very aware of some of the tactics and things that were going on with the government. And so they didn't just wholeheartedly believe and go for everything the government kind of put down. However, if you set a kind of a precedent, or you set the stage to where the only logical thing that will be an outcome is the solution that we were wanting to bring in the first place. So that's the Hegelian dialectic, okay? Problem, reaction, solution, okay? Moving on, Jane Addams, another one of the reform folks at the time. She is credited as being the first woman to actually second a nomination of a presidential candidate by offering a speech during the 1912 election cycle supporting Theodore Roosevelt. And we're definitely going to look at that as being kind of a contradiction to what she says she's, all about. So she was a seminary student. She was a lesbian. She was the founder of Whole House, which was an organization to try and help with like after school care, giving assistance to single mothers, new parents, things like that. Child care, all of those type of services. So she was actually kind of patterned off the Toynbee houses that she saw in London. She established the settlement house, again, like I said, to offer some nursery, kindergarten, different types of programs like that. She also later wrote a book in 1907, The Newer Ideals of Peace, where she is very openly anti-imperialism. Very much against, big military or, kind of that militaristic movements that was going on, which is, again, when I say a contradiction, because just about everything about this lady was in opposites to herself. She was, like I said, a seminary student, but a semi-open lesbian. And again, that back then it was known but not bandied about, if you will. Of course, she was also very wealthy, so there wasn't as much reprisal for someone who was upper society who were involved in alternative lifestyles, as we would say today. So that was already kind of but you said you holding up the Bible, which speaks against it, but yet you're participating. And then at the same time, she is openly in full support of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency and candidacy at the time, when he has always been very much one of the first and strongest voices for imperialism. So for her to turn around and say, oh, no, I'm anti-imperialism, and actually becomes the voice of the anti-imperialist movement in many ways, this becomes what we call a controlled opposition. So anytime you have a Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution, you have to build into the equation, and not everybody's going to go along with it. And what you don't want to have happen are strong grassroots groups getting together and organically growing in popularity to protest certain ideas of what you're trying to accomplish, whatever ideal you're trying to bring forth. You don't want that movement to really gain a lot of traction. So what do? You have somebody who's working really with you, pretending to oppose what your ideas are, so that the people who don't agree with it are rallying with them. But we already know that that's not going to go anywhere because it's already controlled. It's run by the very people who are pushing the agenda that you may be against, okay? Finally, suffrage passed in some states before nationally, becoming a thing, before the actual 20th Amendment is actually passed. No, the 19th Amendment, I'm sorry. The 19th Amendment was actually, before it was passed, you had several states, some of which are the states Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Washington, California, Oregon, Montana, Arizona, Kansas, Alaska, Illinois, North Dakota, Indiana, Nebraska, Michigan, Arkansas, New York, South Dakota, and Oklahoma. You should be familiar with at least 3 of those. Make sure you're able to rattle off at least 3. Okay? The 19th Amendment, again, like I said, it was ratified in 1920, making it legal for women to vote in all states. All right, Herbert Crowley was against the trust, so we're talking about trust busting now, because it stifled economic growth and opportunities. America, or from a governmental standpoint, they were holding a laissez-faire, or what we call hands-off policy, is how it related to the monopolies, the cartels, and the trust. So it's like the government's like, oh, we're hands off, we're laissez-faire. But Herbert Crowley was actually saying, no, this is rife with corruption, and they're paying for politics. They're paying for laws to be passed in their favor, etc. 2 of the integration models was the vertical and the horizontal. Carnegie used a vertical model whereby you go through and control each piece of the industry. And then the horizontal, which was example by Rockefeller, where you just buy out your competition, okay? So Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson had varying approaches to trust, okay? So you want to make sure that you understand what they were, what their different opinions were, and what the pressure points were for, to kind of drive some of these decisions, okay? Then you had environmentalism was beginning as well. So you had kind of the conservation approach, which seeks proper use and protection of the natural resources, and a kind of environmental utilitarianism, which emphasizes the efficient use of available resources through planning and control and the prevention of waste, okay? Then you had the preservationists, right, where they said protect nature at all costs. Just protect it from use. And you would start to see things like Yellowstone National Park, like we just you can come look, but we're really kind of stopping any use